There is a building in Mexico City where, if the walls could talk, they would only know two words: awe and heartbreak. You have probably never set foot in it. Maybe you have never even heard its name spoken out loud. But you have seen what happened inside it. You have seen it 100 times, in slow motion, on tape gone soft with age, in some highlight reel a friend showed you when you were young, a man weaving through an entire defense like they were traffic cones, a hand that touched a ball it was never supposed to touch, a goal so perfect it went quiet in a place holding 100,000 people. All of it happened here, in the same building, 16 years apart. Most stadiums are built to hold a crowd. This one was built to hold history. And in the summer of 2026, for the first time in 40 years, the world is coming back to it. So before the whistle blows, let me tell you about the building first. Because to understand what happened inside it, you have to understand where it stands. The Estadio Azteca sits in the south of Mexico City, in a neighborhood called Santa Ursula. And it does not sit at sea level the way the stadiums you grew up watching do. It sits at more than 7,000 feet, higher than Denver, higher than most airplanes are when they turn off the seatbelt sign after takeoff. When they broke ground on it in 1961, the engineers were not just solving for concrete and steel, they were solving for the sky itself, for air so thin that the men who play in it feel their lungs burning by the 30th minute, their legs turning to wet sand, their heads going light in a way no amount of training ever fully fixes. That was on purpose, not cruelty, just Mexico refusing to apologize for what it is. They dug the thing partly into the ground, into volcanic rock, because there was too much of it to move and too little money to move it with. And that rock matters. Because all of this land, all of this valley, was born from fire. The whole city is built on the bones of old volcanoes and a lake the Spanish drained centuries ago. So when I call the Azteca a cathedral, understand I mean, it literally sits on something ancient and molten and unforgiving. It opened in 1966. And it opened big, 110,000 seats, give or take, in the early days. 2 tiers stacked so steep that when you stand at the bottom and look up, the crowd does not seem to sit around you. It seems to hang over you, like a wave that never breaks. Players who walked out of that tunnel for the first time have described the same feeling, over and over in different languages. The sound arrives before the sight does. You hear the roar in your chest before your eyes even adjust to the light. Now here's what I want you to sit with for a second. In your life, you have probably had 1 or 2 places that felt bigger than the thing that happened in them. A church where someone got married. A hospital where someone was born or wasn't. A stadium in your own hometown where, for one night, you were part of something you could not have built alone. Places soak up meaning. They hold it long after the people leave. You walk back in years later, and the air feels thick with everything it witnessed. The Azteca is that multiplied by the entire planet? Because in 1970, the world came to it for the first time. And what the world found was a Brazilian team that many people to this day will tell you was the greatest collection of footballers ever assembled on one field. Yellow shirts. A number 10 on the back of a man named Pelé. Already a legend, now playing his last World Cup. Playing it like a man who knew he would never pass this way again. They won the final in that stadium. They lifted the trophy under that steep, hanging crowd. And a generation of people watched it on color television for the first time in history. The green of the grass and the yellow of the shirts burning into memory in a way black and white never could. That was the first ghost the Azteca took in. But it was not the famous one. Not the one your friend showed you. Not the one that comes up every 4 years when the arguments start again about who was the best to ever do it. For that ghost, we have to wait 16 years. We have to wait for a smaller man from a poorer country, carrying a heavier weight, to walk out of that same tunnel and into that same thin air and do 2 things in the space of 4 minutes that nobody has ever fully reconciled. One of them was a lie. One of them was a miracle. And they happened at the same end of the same field in front of the same hanging crowd. I will get there. I promise you I will get there. but I need you to hold one idea in your head as we go. This building was designed to take something away from the men who play in it: the air, the strength, the margin for error. It was built to make greatness harder to reach, which is exactly why the greatness that reached it there feels different. June 22nd, 1986. A Sunday. The Azteca is full to the brim. More than 100,000 people, and the air is doing what the air always does up there. It is thinning the blood and shortening the breath of 22 men who are about to play a quarterfinal that was never really about football. Because on one side you have England, and on the other you have Argentina. And 4 years earlier, those two countries had sent young men to die on a cluster of cold, wind-swept islands in the South Atlantic over who owned them: the Falklands, Las Malvinas, if you were on the other side of it. A short, brutal war that killed hundreds of boys who never got to be men. And now, in the thin air of Mexico City, their two nations were meeting on a field with the whole world watching. Nobody said out loud that it was about the war. Everybody knew it was about the war. And then in the space of 4 minutes, in the second half, one man made sure this stadium would never be talked about the same way again. His name was Diego Armando Maradona, 5'5", built low to the ground like something that could not be knocked over. He came from a slum on the edge of Buenos Aires called Villa Fiorito, the kind of place where a boy learns to keep the ball close because if he loses it, he does not get it back. And in this game, in this stadium, he did two things that people are still arguing about tonight, wherever football is loved. The first was a crime. A high ball floats into the England box. Maradona rises for it against the goalkeeper, a big man with long arms, and the ball ends up in the net. But Maradona did not head it, he punched it. He reached up with his left fist above his own head and knocked it in with his hand, and then he ran away, celebrating before anyone could be sure of what they had seen. The referee did not see it. There was no video review in 1986. No slow motion to save the truth. The goal stood. England was furious. And Maradona, years later, gave it a name that stuck to it forever. He called it the Hand of God. A lie. Dressed up as scripture. And the Azteca took it in, the way it takes everything in. But here's the part that makes the whole thing impossible to hate cleanly. 4 minutes later, he got the ball again. This time, in his own half, nearly 60 yards from the England goal. And what happened next is, by wide agreement, the single greatest goal ever scored in a World Cup. He turned, he accelerated, and he ran through the entire England team like they were standing still, like they were figures in a diorama, beating one man, then another, then the goalkeeper, and then rolling the ball into an empty net with the outside of his foot while half of England lay on the grass behind him. Same man, same 4 minutes, same stadium, same steep hanging crowd. He cheated to score one, and he transcended the entire sport to score the other. And the country he did it against had, 4 years before, buried its sons in a war his country started or his country finished, depending on which flag you were born under. Now sit with that for a second. Because this is the thing about the Azteca I really want you to understand. Most great sports moments are clean. A buzzer beater. A walk-off home run. A perfect drive down the 18th fairway. They are pure, and we love them because they are pure. But the Azteca does not deal in pure. The Azteca deals in the whole man. The genius and the con artist in the same body, in the same afternoon, breathing the same thin air. It gives you the miracle and the lie and refuses to let you separate them. And I think that is why, 40 years later, we are still talking about it. Not because it was beautiful. Plenty of things are beautiful. We are still talking about it because it was true. Because it was human in a way that a clean highlight never is. You have known people like that. I have too. People who were the best and the worst thing in a room at the same time. People you could not fully forgive and could not fully condemn. People who did one thing that broke your heart and one thing that saved it, and you never quite untangled which one you loved them for. That is Maradona. That is those 4 minutes. And it all happened in a building that was designed, from the very first shovel of volcanic rock, to make greatness harder to reach. So when the world comes back to the Azteca in 2026, It is not walking into a stadium. It is walking into the room where the most human afternoon in the history of the sport still hangs in the air, waiting. But the Azteca is not the only story Mexico is telling this summer. There are 2 more buildings, and the next one was not carved into ancient rock. It was shaped like something that has been trying to erupt for a very long time. Fly northwest from Mexico City for about an hour, and you land in Guadalajara. And Guadalajara will tell you, without much prompting, that it is the real Mexico. The mariachi was born here, so was tequila. An hour down the road in a town that shares the drink's name. This is the Mexico of the postcards. The wide-brimmed hats and the brass horns and the blue agave fields running to the horizon like rows in a green ocean. It is proud, and it is old, and it does not consider itself the second city of anything. And on the western edge of it, out past the sprawl, there is a stadium that looks like it is either being born or trying to blow. They call it the Estadio Akron now, though for years people called it by the name of the club that plays there, Chivas, the most Mexican club in Mexican football, a team that to this day will only sign Mexican players. No foreigners. A rule that sounds like stubbornness until you realize it is really a kind of faith. A belief that this country can produce, from its own soil, everything it needs. The stadium opened in 2010, and whoever designed it did not want a bowl. Bowls are what the rest of the world builds. They wanted something that came out of the earth. So the outer shell of the thing is a low, sloping, grass-covered mound, seamless, rising out of the ground like a hill that was always there. And the roof floats above the seating in a ring, with a gap between the roof and the stands, so that from a distance the whole structure looks like the mouth of a volcano with a cloud of smoke hanging over its rim. That is not me reaching for a metaphor, that was the intention. In a country shaped by fire, in a valley of dead volcanoes, they built a stadium that looks like a living one. Now here is where I want to slow down, because it would be easy to spend this whole video on the Azteca. The Azteca has the ghosts. The Azteca has Maradona and Pelé and the black and white photographs. And I understand the pull of that. When something old has already been made holy, it is easy to keep worshiping there. But I think there is a quieter truth in a building like the Akron. And it is this. The Azteca is where legends came to be confirmed. Pelé was already Pelé. Maradona was already Maradona. They arrived great, and the stadium simply witnessed it. But a building like the Akron, a young building, a building without ghosts yet, is where the next ones will be made. Nobody knows their names right now. Some of them are teenagers this summer, watching from a couch. The way you once watched something that changed what you thought was possible. And in a few weeks, in that volcano-shaped bowl in Guadalajara, one of them is going to do something in front of the whole world that people will still be describing in 40 years. That is the strange thing about a stadium. It is the same building the day before greatness and the day after. Nothing about the concrete changes. What changes is what it now holds. Think about the places in your own life that way for a second. The house you grew up in was just a house until the family filled it. The corner bar was just a room until it became the room where you met the person you married, or the room where you got the phone call that split your life into a before and an after. The building does not make the meaning. The living does. The building just agrees to remember. The Akron has already started remembering. It has hosted finals, it has hosted the roar of a Chivas title, it has held its own smaller ghosts. But its biggest days are still in front of it, and in 2026, the world walks in and hands it a stack of blank pages. There is something almost unbearable about a place like that. A place that is ready for meaning it has not received yet. You have stood in rooms like it, a new home before the boxes are unpacked, a nursery before the child comes home, a field before the first whistle. The silence in those rooms is not empty, it is expectant, it is a held breath. That is Guadalajara this summer, a volcano that has smoked but never truly erupted, waiting for the match that finally lights it. And there is one more building. Further north still, out where the desert meets the mountains, in a city that most Americans have heard of only for the wrong reasons. And that stadium, the third and last of them, might be the one that tells the truest story of all, because it stands in a place that knows exactly what it means to be misunderstood. Monterrey. Say the name to most Americans, and if it registers at all, it registers as a headline. A dangerous place, a cartel place, a place you drive through fast or do not drive through at all. That is the reputation. And like most reputations, it is a thin, cheap thing laid over something much more complicated underneath. Because Monterrey is, in truth, the richest, most industrial, most buttoned-up city in Mexico. It is the country's factory floor and its boardroom at the same time. If Mexico City is the soul and Guadalajara is the heart, Monterrey is the hands. This is where the steel gets made, where the cement gets poured, where the fortunes get built. The people here have a reputation among other Mexicans for being serious, hard-working, tight with a peado, a little cold. The way the rest of a country sometimes talks about the city that makes all the money. And the mountains. My God, the mountains. Monterrey sits in a bowl ringed by the Sierra Madre, and one peak in particular hangs over the whole city. The Cerro de la Silla, Saddle Mountain, named for the dip in its ridge that looks exactly like a saddle. It is the thing every photograph of Monterrey has in the background, whether the photographer wanted it or not. It is inescapable. It watches the city the way the Aztecas crowd watches the field. So when they built the new stadium, the Estadio BBVA, in 2015, they did the only honest thing they could do. They pointed it at the mountain. The whole stadium is oriented so that for most of the seats, when you look past the far goal, you are not looking at a wall or a scoreboard or a parking structure. You are looking at the Cerro de la Silla, rising green and gray behind the pitch. They cut a hole in the world so the mountain could watch the game. People call the stadium El Gigante de Acero, the Giant of Steel. And the name fits because it was made by a city that makes steel, in a country that was built, quite literally, on fire and rock and metal. Now I want to pull these three buildings together for a second, because a pattern is forming and I do not want you to miss it. The Azteca sits on the drained bed of an ancient lake, dug into volcanic stone, in the thin air 7,000 feet up. The Akron rises out of the ground in Guadalajara shaped like the mouth of a volcano. And the BBVA sits in the palm of a mountain range in Monterrey, built of steel, staring up at a peak that predates everything human by millions of years. Fire, earth, metal, stone. This is not a country that builds stadiums on flat, forgettable ground and fills them with the smell of nachos and the sound of a scoreboard operator asking you to make some noise. This is a country that builds its temples into the actual body of the land, so that the land is always the 11th player, the 12th man, the silent witness in the background of every photograph. And here's the thing I keep coming back to. The thing that I think Americans especially need to hear this summer. We are about to spend a month watching a tournament that for the first time is being played across our own continent. Some of the games will be here in the United States, in enormous, gorgeous, climate-controlled buildings that seat 80,000 people, and were, most of them, built for a different sport entirely. Football, our football, the one with the pads, and those buildings are marvels. I am not knocking them. But they are not haunted, not yet. They do not have Maradona in the walls. They do not have Pelé lifting a trophy in fading color film. They do not sit in the thin air of a drained lake or in the palm of an ancient mountain. They are magnificent, and they are new. And newness is its own kind of poverty when it comes to meaning. Mexico is bringing something to this tournament that money cannot buy and turf cannot fake. Mexico is bringing memory. It is bringing the ghosts. It is bringing three buildings that already know what it feels like when 100,000 people stop breathing at the same time. And I think when we watch the games in Mexico City and Guadalajara and Monterrey this summer, we are going to feel the difference, even if we cannot name it. There is a weight to a place that has held something. You can feel it walk into a room before you understand why. But to really understand why Mexico feels this game the way it does, why it treats these buildings like cathedrals instead of stadiums, you have to go back further than any of these three structures. You have to go back to before the concrete, back to a version of this game that was played here on the same land more than 1,000 years ago, with stakes so high that the losers sometimes did not walk off the field alive. long before anyone poured concrete in Santa Ursula, long before Maradona, long before the Spanish drained the lake. There was a ball game on this land. And it was not a metaphor for life and death. It was sometimes literally life and death. The Maya called a version of it Poctapoc. The Aztecs called their version Ullamalistli. Archaeologists have found the stone courts for it all over Mesoamerica, more than 1,000 of them. Some of them older than the pyramids at Giza. The oldest rubber ball ever discovered came from this game, from this part of the world, more than 3,000 years ago. Think about that. The people on this land were shaping rubber into a bouncing sphere and building stone arenas to play with it, while much of the rest of the planet had not yet figured out the wheel. The court was a long, narrow alley of stone, walls sloping up on either side, and the ball was solid rubber, heavy, sometimes as much as 8 or 9 pounds. The players could not use their hands or their feet the way we do now. They struck the ball with their hips, their forearms, their thighs, hurling their bodies at a stone-hard mass, moving fast enough to break bone. Players were bruised black. Some were killed outright by a blow to the head or the chest. They wore padding, yokes of leather and wood around the waist, but the padding was for survival, not comfort. And in some versions, in some cities, at some times, the game was tied to the deepest thing a culture can be tied to: the movement of the sun, the turning of the seasons, the favor of the gods. The court was a model of the cosmos, and the ball was the sun or the moon crossing the sky, and the game was a way of keeping the universe in motion. To play was to participate in creation itself. And yes, sometimes the losing captain or the losing team was sacrificed, their blood offered up to keep the world turning. There is carved stone in a place called El Tajin and another called Chichen Itza showing exactly this: a player kneeling, another player standing over him, holding what he is about to lose. The stone does not flinch. It was not meant to. Now, I am not telling you this to be lurid. I am not telling you this so you will think of ancient horror the next time you watch a penalty kick. I am telling you this because I want you to understand something about the ground these 3 stadiums are built on. This is not a country that discovered ball games in the 20th century when the Europeans brought the modern one over on a boat. This is a country where the ball, the arena, the crowd, the stakes, the idea that a game played with a sphere could carry the weight of the entire world, all of that is 3,000 years old. It is in the soil. It predates the language most Mexicans now speak. It predates the religion most of them now practice. When the Spanish arrived and were horrified by what they saw and tried to stamp the game out, they could burn the courts and they could ban the play, but they could not reach the thing underneath it. The instinct, the knowing, the idea that a ball in an arena is not entertainment, it is meaning. So when modern football arrived, brought by British miners and railwaymen in the 19th century, it did not land on empty ground. It landed on a country that had been playing a version of this for 3,000 years. It landed on a memory that ran deeper than memory. And the country took to it the way a body takes to water it has been thirsty for without knowing. That is why the Azteca is a cathedral and not a stadium. That is why the Akron is shaped like a volcano and the BBVA points at a mountain. Because in Mexico, this game was never just a game. It was never separate from the land, the fire, the sky, the gods, the whole aching business of being alive under a sun you cannot control. I think about this a lot when I watch Americans discover the World Cup for the first time. And a lot of us will, this summer. A lot of us who grew up on other sports, who found soccer boring, who could not understand a game where sometimes nobody scores. A lot of us are about to watch a tournament on our own soil and feel for the first time why the rest of the planet loses its mind over this. And when that feeling comes, when you find yourself standing in your living room with your hands on your head because a man you had never heard of did something impossible, I want you to know that the feeling is not new. It is one of the oldest feelings there is. People on this exact land felt it 3,000 years ago. The ball crossed the arena, and the crowd stopped breathing, and something in the chest lifted toward the sky. The stakes are lower now. Nobody dies at the Azteca. But the feeling is the same feeling. It always was. And it leads to a question worth sitting with. If this game is that old, that deep, that woven into the bones of a place, then what does it actually mean for a country to host it? What does Mexico get and what does it give up? Here is a fact that surprises almost everyone who hears it. Mexico is the first country in the history of the World Cup to host it 3 times, 1970, 1986, and now 2026. No other nation has done that. Not Brazil, not Germany, not Italy, not England, Mexico. And the second of those, 1986, the Maradona one, the one everyone remembers. Mexico was never even supposed to host. Colombia had the tournament. Colombia had been awarded it years earlier. But Colombia's economy buckled, the costs ballooned, the government realized it could not afford the thing it had promised, and it handed the World Cup back. And Mexico, which had just hosted 16 years before and still had the stadium standing, raised its hand and said, "We will take it." Then 8 months before Colombia officially withdrew, something else happened. In September of 1985, a massive earthquake struck Mexico City. It killed thousands of people. It flattened whole blocks of the capital. The city was still digging its dead out of the rubble, still grieving, still counting the cost, when it committed to hosting the entire world at play. Sit with the strangeness of that for a second. A city buries its dead, and then throws open its doors and says, "Come, watch us play." There is something almost defiant in it. Something that says, we are broken and we are grieving and we are also going to hold the most joyful event on the planet, because life does not pause to let you finish mourning, and neither will we. The Azteca stood through that earthquake, barely damaged. The cathedral held. And 9 months later, Maradona walked out of its tunnel. Now I want to be honest with you, because you have lived long enough to smell a story that is only telling you the pretty half. Hosting a World Cup is not free. And it is not always a gift to the people who live there. The stadiums cost money, the security costs money, the infrastructure, the roads, the airports, the promises made to FIFA, all of it costs money. And that money comes from somewhere, and it does not always come back. There are economists who will tell you, with good numbers, that hosting these tournaments rarely pays for itself, that the jobs are temporary, that the stadiums in some countries sit half empty and rotting a decade later, monuments to a month of glory the taxpayers are still paying off. That is real. I am not going to pretend it away. When a poorer country spends fortunes to host the world's party, there is always a fair and painful question about whether that money should have built hospitals instead, about who profits and who pays, and whether the men in the FIFA suits fly home richer while the city that hosted them is left holding the bill. But Mexico's case is unusual, and it is worth understanding why. Mexico is not building from scratch. The Azteca already stood. Guadalajara and Monterrey already had their modern stadiums, built for their own clubs, paid for and used every week of every year. Mexico is not pouring billions into arenas that will sit empty in 2027. These are working buildings. They were full the week before the World Cup, and they will be full the week after. The party is passing through houses that were already lived in. And that, I think, is the difference between hosting a dream and hosting a debt. Some countries build a fantasy for a month and wake up broke. Mexico is opening the doors of a home it already keeps. There is a lesson in that, and I am not going to insult you by spelling it all the way out. But you have seen it in your own life. You have seen people who threw everything they had into one perfect night, one wedding, one party, one grand gesture, and spent years paying it off, chasing a feeling that lasted an evening. And you have seen other people who simply opened the door of a home they had built slowly over decades and welcomed everyone in. And it cost them almost nothing because the work was already done, quietly, long before anyone came to see it. One of those is a performance. The other is a life. The Azteca is not a performance. It has been standing in that thin air for 60 years, holding weddings of a sort, funerals of a sort, the whole span of a nation's joy and grief. When the world arrives this summer, it is not walking into a set that was built for the cameras. It is walking into someone's living room, the oldest, most storied living room in the entire sport. And in a few weeks, that living room is going to do something it has done only a handful of times in 6 decades. Let me tell you about the air one more time. because it is going to matter this summer in a way that has nothing to do with poetry. At 7,000 feet, the human body is in trouble and does not fully know it. There is roughly a quarter less oxygen in every breath than there is at sea level. For a man sitting still, that is manageable. For a man sprinting, recovering, sprinting again, 90 minutes of it, it is a slow drowning in open air. The lungs cannot pull enough. The muscles flood with acid. The recovery between efforts, the thing elite athletes rely on without even thinking about it, simply does not come. By the second half, players who trained their whole lives at sea level are running through wet cement while their hearts hammer against their ribs. And here is the cruelty of it. You cannot fully train for it from far away. You can arrive early and try to adjust, and teams will fly into Mexico weeks ahead and sleep in the thin air and let their blood thicken with the extra red cells the body makes to survive up there. But there is only so much a visitor can do. The body that was made at altitude, the body that grew up breathing that air as a child, has an advantage stitched into it that no training camp can fully close, which is why Mexico at the Azteca has always been so hard to beat. This is the home field advantage in its purest, most physical form. Not a loud crowd, not a friendly referee. The actual air, the actual altitude. A game where the ground itself is on the home team side. Now widen the lens with me. Because this is where 2026 gets interesting in a way no World Cup has ever been. This is the first time the tournament is being shared by 3 countries. The United States, Canada, and Mexico. And those 3 countries are not just 3 flags. They are 3 completely different physical worlds. You could play a game at sea level in a humid coastal city, and then days later, play a game 7,000 feet up in the thin air of the Valley of Mexico. The distances are enormous. The climates swing from desert heat to mountain chill. A team could travel farther between 2 matches in this World Cup than teams used to travel across an entire tournament in Europe. And that changes the game itself. It always has. The teams that win World Cups are not only the most talented, they are the ones who solve the puzzle of the place, who adjust to the air, the heat, the travel, the ground. In 1970 and 1986, the whole tournament was played in Mexican altitude and heat, and it favored a certain kind of team, a patient team, a team that kept the ball and made the other side chase it in the thin air until they broke. Brazil in 1970 did exactly that. They did not run more than everyone else. They ran less. They made the ball do the running because the ball does not get tired and does not need oxygen. And in that thin air, that was not just beautiful. It was survival. There is something in that worth holding on to, and it reaches past football. Most of us spend our lives believing that the way forward is to run harder, to spend more, push more, grind more, out-effort everyone in the room, and sometimes that works. But the deepest wisdom I have ever seen in sport and out of it belongs to the people who learned to make the work do the running, who found the still point, who understood that in the thin air, the one who panics and sprints is the one who dies, and the one who stays calm and keeps possession is the one who is still standing at the end. The Azteca has been teaching that lesson for 60 years. It just teaches it with lungs instead of words. And this summer, the whole world is going to have to learn it again, in real time, in front of us. The best players on Earth, men who have conquered every league and every stadium at sea level, are going to walk out into that thin air and discover that the ground has an opinion, that the place is a player, that in Mexico, you do not just beat the other 11 men. You beat the altitude, the history, the ghosts, and 100,000 people who have watched greater men than these come and fall short in exactly this spot. Some of them will rise to it. That is the thing about a hard place. It does not only break people, sometimes it makes them. Maradona did not transcend the sport at sea level. He did it up there, in the thin air, in the hardest place to do it, which is precisely why it counted the way it did. The difficulty was not the obstacle to the greatness. The difficulty was the greatness. Take away the thin air, and the 4 minutes are just 4 minutes. So when you watch the games in Mexico City this summer, and you see a player bent over at the 80th minute, hands on his knees, chest heaving, understand what you are looking at. You are not watching him lose fitness. If you have made it this far into the video with me, I want to invite you to subscribe to the channel and come back and spend time with us. We put these stories together for people like you, people who did not just want the score, who wanted to know what the thing underneath the score actually was. That is who we make these for. And if that is you, you belong here. And I say that because I think the people watching this are a particular kind of person. You are old enough to have loved something and lost it. You have had a team, or a town, or a version of your own life that did not end the way you wanted. And you have learned the slow way that the meaning was never really in the winning. It was in the caring, in the showing up, in the standing in the stands with people who felt the same ache you did. Which brings me to the part of these stadiums I have not talked about yet. The stands. The people. Because a stadium is not the concrete. I have been telling you about volcanic rock and steel and thin air, and all of that is true, but it is not the thing. The thing is the 100,000 people. A stadium with nobody in it is just a very large, very sad building. What makes the Azteca is not the bowl. It is what fills the bowl. It is a Mexican crowd, which is one of the great crowds on earth, because it brings to the game exactly what its ancestors brought to that stone court 3,000 years ago. Total commitment. The whole self. No irony, no distance, no half-caring. And a Mexican crowd will do something to you if you are not ready for it. It will sing before the game, and it will sing after a loss. It will bring color and noise and a kind of joy that does not depend on the result, because for these people, the game was never only about the result. It was about being here, together, under the mountain, in the thin air, in the volcano for one more afternoon, in a life that does not give you very many afternoons like this. You have felt that even if it was somewhere else, even if it was another sport entirely. That thing where 20,000 strangers become for 2 hours something like a family. Where you hug a man you have never met because a ball went in a net. Where you all groan at the same instant and all rise at the same instant, and for a little while, the loneliness that follows all of us around like a shadow just lets go of your shoulder. That is not small. That is one of the last places left in modern life, where a large group of strangers feels one thing at the same time. Mexico has been practicing that feeling for 3,000 years. It is very, very good at it. And this summer, the world gets to sit in those stands. There is a photograph I keep coming back to. It is from June of 1986, the day after the final, taken inside the Azteca. The crowd is gone. The confetti is still on the ground. And the stadium is empty, this enormous bowl in the thin air, holding nothing but light and silence and whatever it is that a place keeps after everyone leaves. I've been calling it a cathedral this whole time. And I want to tell you why that word, and not some other word, before we finish. A cathedral is not built for the priest. The priest is there for an hour. A cathedral is built for the ones who come in off the street, carrying whatever they are carrying, and sit down in the cool and the quiet and feel for a moment that their small life is part of something older and larger than itself. It is built to make an ordinary person feel connected to the whole long human story, to fire and stone and sky, and everyone who ever stood on that ground before them, and everyone who will stand there after. That is what the Azteca does. That is what the volcano in Guadalajara will do. That is what the giant of steel under the Saddle Mountain does when the sun goes down behind the Sierra Madre, and the lights come up and the ball rolls into the middle of the field. For 3,000 years on this land, people have gathered around a ball in an arena and felt themselves become, for a little while, part of the turning of the world. The stakes have changed. Nobody's life is on the line now. But the feeling has not changed at all. The lift in the chest when the ball crosses the line. The 100,000 people who stop breathing at the same instant. The stranger you embrace. The grief you carry in and for 90 minutes get to set down. The Spanish tried to end it and could not. An earthquake tried to end it and could not. The thin air makes it harder, and the players do it anyway. And this summer, the world comes back to the oldest ball ground on Earth to do it one more time. Whatever happens there, it will not be clean. It never has been. There will be a hand where there should have been a header. There will be a miracle 4 minutes later that nobody can explain. There will be men bent over gasping in the thin air, and one of them will rise from it into something we will describe until we are old. The building is ready. It has been ready for 60 years. It is just waiting to see who walks out of the tunnel this time and what they leave behind in the walls. If this stayed with you, do 2 things for me. Subscribe and stay with us, because we are going to walk into every one of these stadiums together this summer and send this to 5 people who love this game or who are about to find out they do. And then leave me a comment. Not a nice one, a true one. Tell me the place in your own life that you would call a cathedral. The room that holds more than it should. And tell me which stadium you want us to walk into next, because there are more of them out there, and every single one is keeping a secret.